Maggie Lung, an associate professor at Utrecht University who used to lecture in research in Hong Kong, criticized the city's immigration and citizenship policies as discriminative. The system gives special privileges to the desired individuals while restricting the rights of others who are framed as unskilled, disposable and a burden, she wrote in a 2016 article in the journal Migration Letters, pointing specifically to the residency ban for domestic workers. Of Hong Kong's ethnic minorities, defined as all non-Chinese groups, about 43% in 2016 were South or Southeast Asian, according to the legislative body's research office. This includes Indians, Pakistanis, Nepalese, Filipinos, Indonesians and more. Pakistanis, Indonesians and Thais tend to have disproportionately high poverty rates. For instance, more than half of all Pakistanis in Hong Kong live below the poverty line without any interventions, according to a 2016 government report. The poverty line is defined as earning half or less of the median monthly household income, which ranges from $20,000 to $59,900 Hong Kong dollars, about $2,580 to $7,729, depending on household size. Whites, other Asians and others, which are largely wealthier groups, make up the rest of the ethnic minority population, according to the research office, which doesn't offer any further ethnic breakdown within those categories. The census income data is based on respondents' ethnic self-identification. It doesn't distinguish between migrant workers, who often end up in lower-paying jobs like construction or manual labor, and minorities who were born in the city. Disadvantage in the classroom. For those minorities who do gain residency and raise their children in Hong Kong, or those like Vachha who are born there, the system can feel stacked against them from the start. Minority children whose families speak non-Chinese languages, such as Tagalog or Urdu rather than Cantonese, can face a language barrier that exacerbates structural challenges in education, setting them back once they enter the job market. From 2006 to 2013, the government funded a number of local schools that admitted a critical mass of non-Chinese speaking students. The program aimed to expand Chinese language learning programs, as well as give educators more experience teaching minority students, which they could then share with other schools. However, the program was met with international and local criticism, with a UN committee calling it de facto discrimination that led to minority and Chinese students attending largely separate schools. While the government suspended the program in 2014, unofficial segregation appears to be continuing, with research showing it can be difficult for minority students to get admissions interviews, which are typically required for most schools, at historically Chinese schools. As of 2016, more than 60% of all ethnic minority students attended just 10 schools out of nearly 840 public primary and secondary schools that serve the city of almost 7.5 million, according to the non-profit organization Hong Kong Unison. In a 2016 statement, Hong Kong's Education Bureau said it had revised the program to avoid over-concentration of non-Chinese speaking students in a limited number of schools and remove the misconception arising from the designated school label, which is in fact a misnomer. A document released by the Legislative Council's research office this year acknowledged that this language barrier might present a challenge for non-Chinese speaking students in adapting to the local education system and progressing to further studies or employment, and reiterated the government's commitment to ensure equal opportunities in education for all eligible children in public sector schools. The language barrier can be a roadblock for children during admissions interviews for local schools where Chinese is the primary language of instruction. However, this hurdle makes it even more difficult for them to learn Cantonese or Mandarin unless they can afford extracurricular tutoring, which in turn can prevent them from pursuing jobs that require Chinese proficiency. Parents want their children to receive a Chinese medium of instruction, kindergarten education, but report being turned away from some kindergartens simply because of their race, said a 2018 report by the Zubin Foundation, a local think tank that focuses on ethnic minorities. The report cited similar experiences from a number of minority families, with one unnamed person saying, "Our Cantonese level is too basic. This is a hurdle for us. It's not that we don't want to learn, it's that we are not given the opportunity to learn." For wealthy immigrant families whose children don't speak Chinese, there's an easy but expensive solution to the language barrier: private international schools, where students speak and are taught in English. But these schools can cost up to 266,000 Hong Kong dollars, about $34,330 a year, which is far out of reach for most families. The city's median monthly household income was 35,500 Hong Kong dollars. About these expat students are largely from more privileged ethnic groups like whites and Koreans, which generally face less severe racial discrimination. This greater societal tolerance, and the students' relative wealth, can cushion them from the disadvantage of not knowing Cantonese. Some less privileged minority students do gain Cantonese fluency through school classes, tutors, or social learning with peers, but sometimes it still isn't enough. In a comprehensive 2015 report, CAPI found some minority members would have no difficulty speaking during telephone job interviews using their fluent Cantonese. Yet CAPI said that when they met the employer in person, the employer would put up excuses to turn them down. When local schools do allow both Chinese and minority students, racist microaggressions can also emerge. CJ Villanueva, 22, is ethnically Filipino but was born and raised in Hong Kong. She remembers local classmates joking that all Filipinos were domestic helpers, a reference to the estimated 200,000 Filipino domestic workers in the city. Sometimes when they joke around, they'd pretend to be cleaning, and say, "I'm just like CJ, I'm like a domestic helper," she said. It wasn't good fun for them, but it was offensive for me and my Filipino friends. Policed and profiled. Everyday racism appears to be so prevalent in Hong Kong that everyone who spoke to CNN had their own range of discrimination stories. For a while, Vachha worked late-night shifts that ended long after the subway stopped running. "All I'd want is to get home, and no taxis would stop for me," he said. "I'd have to get someone else to stand on the street and get the taxi. I'd literally hide behind a pillar, then get in the taxi when it stopped." Being denied taxi service happens quite a lot, Villanueva said. When she was about 17, one driver told her he does not serve people of my skin color. Finding housing is just as hard, Vachha added. A few years ago, he was about to sign the contract on an apartment when the landlord met him in person. Later, as Vachha was standing next to the real estate agent, the agent got a text from the landlord saying he no longer wanted Vachha in the building. $4,580 in 2019 for households with at least one resident in the workforce. Underlying these types of discrimination are stereotypes of darker-skinned minorities as unclean, dangerous or untrustworthy, said Villanueva and Vachha. Experts and researchers say these stereotypes are reinforced by media reports that emphasize and sensationalize crimes committed by ethnic minorities, while offering no such emphasis on Chinese-committed crimes. Villanueva remembers seeing such reports while growing up. "Locals have a fixed image on ethnic minorities," she said. "Like, they think Nepalese are all gangsters, or South Asians like Pakistanis or Indians are members of gangs. In the news, they'll always say, 'This robbery happened, it was a South Asian who did it.'" Unfair treatment extends to the workplace. Across a range of jobs, employees who are members of ethnic minority groups report experiencing longer working hours, lower wages, unfair dismissals, and a lack of opportunity in career advancement, according to CAPI's study. A particularly pervasive form of everyday racism can also come with police profiling. In Hong Kong, ethnically Chinese residents can go their whole lives without being stopped and searched by police on the street, whereas non-ethnic Chinese people of color say it's a common reality for them. Leo Rizal Zara, a Filipino-American who moved to Hong Kong in 2017 for a job in hospitality, said there was a period when he was stopped by police at least once a week. One time, he didn't have his identification, and he says he had to bring the officers back to his apartment to show them his passport. Sometimes I'd just be leaving a restaurant and I'd be stopped, he said. It wasn't overtly racist, but it was like, what am I doing? I'm just walking out of a restaurant. That's not suspicious activity. How can you invite these people to come to your country and work for you, then arrest them or stop them for their skin color, the way they look? The Hong Kong police force doesn't keep statistics breaking down stop and searches by ethnicity or nationality, so it's difficult to measure the extent of racial profiling. But the sheer frequency of these searches has come under scrutiny. The police conducted checks on 1.76 million people in 2018, almost a quarter of the entire population. To put that into perspective, in New York, a city with almost 1 million more people than Hong Kong, police conducted 13,459 stops in 2019, according to the New York Civil Liberties Union. In a statement to CNN, a police spokesperson said that current laws allow police to stop, detain and search anybody who acts in a suspicious manner. The spokesperson added that all officers receive anti-discrimination training and attend seminars to enhance their understanding of ethnic minority cultures and languages. The force is committed to promoting racial equality, fairness and respect, said the statement. In delivering quality services, the force is determined to ensure impartiality in all dealings with members of the public, irrespective of their ethnic background. An insufficient law. Hong Kong's Race Discrimination Ordinance, RDO, enacted in 2008, is supposed to criminalize racial discrimination or harassment. But critics argue that loopholes allow harmful practices to continue, and that it focuses too much on individual cases rather than addressing systemic racism. Critically, the RDO doesn't cover discrimination by law enforcement. The government is bound by the law in areas of employment, services and provisions, but not in exercising functions and powers. Police operations fall under this category, meaning the law doesn't apply when officers conduct stop and search, arrests and detention, or criminal investigations. Activists and experts voiced concerns as early as 2006, when the RDO was being drafted. They argued that it didn't provide strong enough protections for already vulnerable minorities, who may fear retaliation if they file complaints. At the time, the government promised to take these remarks into consideration for future revisions. Now, 14 years later, they continue to drag their feet, said Kapai.